The morning on Everest 7 always began the same way. Two pale suns climbed slowly above the horizon, spilling soft golden light across endless fields of alien grain. The wind moved gently through the crops, carrying a dry, earthy scent across the valley. It was the kind of quiet that made the whole world feel half asleep. Nothing exciting ever happened here. And for most of the 800 colonists who lived on this distant farming world, that was exactly the point. Everest 7 was not a place for heroes, soldiers, or explorers. It was a place for farmers, scientists, and families who wanted distance from the chaos of the larger galaxy. A peaceful place. A forgotten place. And today, like every other day, Dr. Lena Vasic was already working before most of the colony had even finished breakfast. She knelt beside a patch of dark soil outside her small research station, carefully brushing dirt away with gloved fingers. A thin metal sampler rested beside her knee, along with several sealed containers filled with soil samples. To anyone watching, her work looked simple. She studied microbes. Tiny life forms hidden in the dirt of an unimportant agricultural planet. The kind of research that rarely appeared in headlines. The kind that no one in the galaxy cared about. Lena preferred it that way. She leaned forward, scooping a fresh sample into a container, sealing it with a soft click. Her brown hair was tied back in a loose knot that had already begun to fall apart. A streak of soil ran across one sleeve of her worn field jacket. She didn't bother cleaning it. Most of her clothes looked like that. Practical. Stained. Forgettable. At 34 years old, Lena looked exactly like what she claimed to be. An ordinary researcher. She was not especially tall. Not particularly strong. Her frame was lean, almost delicate. She wore no jewelry. No visible technology. No weapons. And if anyone in the wider galaxy had searched the official databases for her name, they would have found nothing unusual. No military service. No classified clearances. No notable history. Just a quiet scientist studying soil on the edge of human space. Behind her, the door of the research station slid open with a soft hiss. A young technician stepped outside holding a steaming cup. "Morning, doctor," he called. Lena glanced back and nodded politely. "Morning." He looked across the field stretching toward the horizon. "Hard to believe anyone ever complains about this place," he said with a smile. "Quiet planet. No politics. No pirates. No military patrols." He raised the cup slightly. "Feels like the safest place in the galaxy." Lena studied the soil in her container for a moment before answering. "Nothing stays safe forever." The technician laughed lightly, assuming it was a joke. Neither of them knew how true those words would become. It happened just after midday. At first it was only a shadow. A long, slow darkness sliding across the golden fields. Lena noticed it immediately. She straightened slightly and looked up. Above the valley, something enormous was descending through the pale sky. Not clouds. Ships. 6 of them. They moved like blades cutting through the air, long and black, their hulls absorbing light instead of reflecting it. The shapes were sharp and unnatural, like pieces of night falling toward the planet. Lena's eyes narrowed slightly. She recognized the design instantly. Breath Dominion carriers. Slaver ships. Behind her, someone screamed. Within seconds, the quiet farming colony exploded into panic. People ran through the streets shouting warnings. Parents grabbed their children and sprinted toward the emergency shelters scattered around the settlement. Doors slammed. Alarms began to howl. But the colonists already knew the truth. Those shelters had never been designed to stop something like this. Everest 7 had no defense grid. No orbital guns. No warships in the sky. Just farmers and scientists. 800 unprotected civilians. The first landing craft slammed into the ground outside the colony with a thunderous crash, flattening rows of alien wheat beneath its heavy hull. Dust and debris blasted into the air. A ramp dropped. And the breath came out. They were enormous. Nearly 3 meters tall. Their bodies were covered in thick black exoskeleton plates that gleamed like polished stone. 4 arms extended from their torsos, each ending in long clawed fingers designed more for tearing than holding. Their faces were flat and insect-like, with wide compound eyes that reflected the sunlight like broken mirrors. And they moved fast. Far too fast for creatures that size. Blue energy crackled along the tips of their shock lances as they spread through the colony in organized lines. This was not chaos. This was a harvest. The breath had done this before. Many times. They moved from building to building, forcing people into the open. Anyone who resisted was struck down instantly with an electric blast that dropped them to the ground screaming. Within minutes, hundreds of terrified colonists were being herded together in the central field. The sorting began. Strong workers were pushed into one shuttle. Children and young adults into another. The elderly, the sick, anyone judged weak. They were simply left behind. Fuel was valuable. Dead weight was not. Lena walked with the rest of the captured colonists, her head lowered, shoulders slightly hunched. A breath soldier stopped her. It scanned her body with a handheld device that emitted a low humming sound. Data flashed across the alien screen. The machine translated the result automatically. Female human. Academic classification. Threat level, negligible. The soldier made a dismissive clicking noise and shoved her forward. She stumbled slightly, then continued walking with the other prisoners toward the largest shuttle. Around her, people cried. Some prayed. Others were too shocked to speak at all. But Lena Vasic said nothing. Her breathing remained slow, steady, controlled. She stepped inside the crowded transport vessel and sat quietly against the metal wall. 200 frightened humans packed into a space meant for cargo. The air was hot, heavy, thick with fear. A man with a broken arm groaned softly nearby. A child sobbed against her mother's shoulder. Outside, the engines roared. The shuttle lifted off the ground. Through a small viewport, Lena watched Everest 7 shrink beneath them. Her research station, her garden, her quiet life, all disappearing into the distance. For a brief moment, something flickered in her expression. Not fear. Something closer to sadness. Then it vanished. Her face became calm again. Behind her closed eyelids, her mind had already begun working. Counting. Analyzing. Calculating. She remembered every guard she had seen. 42 on the ground. Organized in teams of 6. Shock lances for control. Plasma sidearms for officers. No heavy weapons visible. Interesting. The shuttle docked with the massive carrier waiting in orbit. Metal doors opened. The prisoners were marched into the belly of the alien warship. Lena stepped forward with the others. Quiet. Invisible. Completely ordinary. Exactly the way they believed her to be. And that would become the Breath Dominion's biggest mistake. The first hours inside the breath carrier were a nightmare. The prisoners were pushed through a massive docking bay filled with loud machines and harsh metallic noise. The air smelled sharp and chemical. Breath soldiers surrounded them from every side, moving with cold efficiency. To them, the humans were nothing more than cargo. Each prisoner was forced through a scanning gate. Bright beams moved across their bodies while a machine analyzed them like livestock. Strength. Health. Value. When Lena stepped forward, the scanner paused for a moment. A line of translated text appeared on the screen. Human female. Academic classification. Threat level, negligible. The breath officer barely looked at her. He waved one arm and Lena was shoved forward with the rest of the prisoners. Minutes later they were locked inside a holding chamber. The door slammed shut behind them with a heavy metallic sound. The room was overcrowded. Around 50 humans were trapped inside. There were no beds, no windows, only metal walls and dim blue lights in the ceiling. Everyone wore a thin metal collar around their neck. Pain compliance devices. The first man who tried to break the door learned how they worked. His collar activated instantly. Electric current shot through his body. He collapsed on the floor, shaking violently. The rest of the prisoners backed away in terror. After that, no one touched the door again. Slowly the room became silent. Not peaceful silence. The silence of people realizing they had been abandoned. Lena sat quietly in the corner, her back against the wall. She looked calm, almost invisible among the frightened prisoners. But she was watching everything. She observed the guards through the narrow slit in the door. 2 guards every patrol. 12-minute intervals. Shock lances for control. Plasma sidearms for officers. She closed her eyes for a moment. The ship vibrated softly beneath the floor. To everyone else it was background noise. To Lena it was information. The engines pulsed through the metal structure of the ship. Each vibration carried clues about distance, power flow, and internal layout. Inside her mind, a map was slowly forming. Around her, the prisoners reacted in different ways. Some stared blankly at the floor. Some whispered quietly about their families. Others cried until exhaustion finally silenced them. On the second day, Lena began moving around the room. Slowly. Carefully. She sat beside different prisoners, speaking softly, asking simple questions. No one realized she was collecting information. The gray-haired man in the corner was Dav, a retired structural engineer. The quiet woman near the door was Priya, a former merchant ship crew member. The broad-shouldered man with scarred hands was Kalia, a veteran combat marine. Every skill, every detail. Lena memorized them all. On the third day she noticed a girl sitting alone against the wall. 16 years old. Pale. Exhausted. Her name was Mara. My mom was taken somewhere else, the girl whispered, wiping her eyes. I don't know where she is. Lena sat beside her calmly. The breaths separate prisoners based on physical ability, she said. Your mother is likely in a labor group on a lower deck. Mara looked up. You sound very sure. Lena gave a faint smile. I pay attention. Something in her voice felt steady. Certain. From that moment, Mara stayed close to her. Being near Lena made the fear feel smaller. On the fourth day the breath returned for punishment. They dragged a man named Tomas into the center of the room. He had tried to hide a small piece of metal from the wall. A weapon. The guards beat him brutally while the prisoners watched helplessly. Mara buried her face against Lena's shoulder. But Lena did not look away. Her eyes followed every movement of the guards. Every strike. Every position. Near the door stood a breath officer with gold markings across his exoskeleton. Subcommander Tyreek. When his compound eyes moved across the prisoners, they stopped on Lena. Everyone else looked terrified. She did not. She was watching him the same way he watched his soldiers during inspection. Measuring. Calculating. 2 hours later the door opened again. A guard pointed directly at Lena. Come. Mara grabbed her arm quickly. Where are they taking you? Lena gently removed her hand. Somewhere quieter, she said softly. You're coming back? Mara asked. Lena squeezed her hand once. Yes. Her voice carried complete certainty. I will come back for you. The guards led her down a long corridor and locked her inside a small isolation cell. 3 meters wide. Bare metal walls. One light panel in the ceiling. Outside the door, Subcommander Tyreek watched her through the observation slit. You are not afraid, he said through the translator. Lena looked directly at him. Should I be? Every human on this ship is afraid. She tilted her head slightly. I am not every human. Tyreek studied her for a long moment. Then he walked away and recorded a short note in the ship's log. Subject 71,138. Unusual behavior. Threat level, negligible. Inside the isolation cell, Lena waited until his footsteps faded. Then she moved. Her fingers traced the seams of the walls. She listened to the ship's vibrations through the floor. After a minute she spoke quietly to the empty room. 16 guards on this deck. Her eyes moved toward the ceiling. Armory 2 decks below. A calm breath escaped her. Manageable. Then she reached up and began removing the light panel. For exactly 60 seconds after the door closed, Lena Vasic did nothing. She stood in the center of the isolation cell, perfectly still, listening. Footsteps outside the corridor slowly faded away. The metallic echo of the guards disappeared around a distant corner. The hum of the door lock settled into a steady vibration. Only when the ship returned to its normal rhythm did she finally move. She walked slowly around the small room, her fingers gliding across the metal walls. She felt every seam, every bolt, every tiny imperfection in the surface. Then she pressed her ear against the wall. The breath carrier was alive with sound. Engines deep below the hull pulsed like a giant heartbeat. Machinery turned somewhere behind the bulkheads. Air flowed through narrow ventilation shafts hidden inside the structure. Most prisoners would hear only noise. Lena heard information. She lowered herself onto the floor and closed her eyes. Through the vibration in the metal deck plates she began mapping the ship again. Deck by deck. Corridor by corridor. Systems and structures slowly aligning inside her memory. After several minutes she opened her eyes. 16 guards on this deck, she said quietly. Her gaze shifted toward the lower wall. Armory, 2 decks below. She tilted her head slightly as another vibration passed through the hull. Engine core, 3 decks down. A small breath escaped her. Manageable. Her attention moved to the ceiling. The light panel above her head glowed softly, casting pale white light across the small room. Lena pulled the metal shelf away from the wall and stepped on top of it. Then she reached up. The panel came loose faster than the breath engineers would have believed possible. Her fingers moved quickly, carefully removing the thin casing without making a sound. Inside was a small power cell and several narrow strips of conductive wiring. Primitive, efficient, but not secure. The breath designed machines for durability, not sabotage. They never expected prisoners to understand their technology. That assumption would cost them. Within minutes the light panel was completely dismantled in Lena's hands. She sat on the floor and began arranging the components carefully. Power cell. Conductive strips. Microfilament wire. She worked mostly by touch now, allowing the darkness of the room to hide her actions from any possible observation. While her hands moved, her mind drifted briefly to a memory she had tried for years to forget. She had been 21 when they approached her. A quiet doctoral student studying alien biology at the University of Geneva. Her life had been simple back then. Research papers. Laboratory work. Long nights reading data. The recruiters arrived without warning. 2 men in plain clothes. They showed identification she could not verify and asked questions that seemed strange at the time. How well did she tolerate pain? How quickly could she memorize numbers? What was the longest she had gone without sleep? At first she thought it was a psychological experiment. She was wrong. The Prometheus enhancement program did not change the body with machines or genetic engineering. It changed the mind. For 18 months they pushed her brain far beyond normal human limits. Chemical treatments, sensory conditioning, neural restructuring. They broke old patterns and built new ones. When the process ended, Lena could read environments the way most people read books. She could feel shifts in air pressure across her skin. Detect vibration patterns through solid metal. Control her breathing and heartbeat with surgical precision. She could memorize complex systems after a single observation. And when necessary, she could fight. Not like a soldier. Like a problem solver. 90 candidates had entered the program with her. Only 12 survived with their minds intact. Those survivors became something new. They were called Lazarus operatives. Hidden across the galaxy under normal identities. Teachers. Engineers. Researchers. Ordinary people. Until a moment arrived when they were needed. Lena finished connecting the final piece of wire and examined the small device in her palm. Ugly. Improvised. But effective. It was a focused electromagnetic pulse generator. Small enough to hide in one hand. Powerful enough to disable a magnetic door lock from 2 meters away. It would work only once. That was enough. Before she could leave the cell, however, there was another problem. The collar around her neck. Pain compliance collars were designed to punish tampering. Any attempt to remove them triggered a lethal electrical surge. Most prisoners never even tried. But Lena had spent 4 days studying the signal pattern each time the device pulsed. Every collar transmitted a tiny control signal through the metal band. A repeating cycle. Exactly every 1.3 seconds. She waited calmly. Pulse. 1.3 seconds. Pulse. Another pause. In the precise gap between signals, Lena slid a thin wire under the collar's control node and disconnected the trigger circuit. The collar slid from her neck like a bracelet. She placed it gently on the floor beside the dismantled light panel. Now she stood. Free. She moved to the door and listened again. Footsteps. 2 guards approaching down the corridor. Their stride pattern was heavy and rhythmic. Breath soldiers moved differently from humans. 4 legs produced a distinct cadence against the metal floor. Lena counted silently. The guards passed her cell. Their footsteps faded. She had 4 minutes before the next patrol. She pressed the small EMP device against the door lock and activated it. A soft pop filled the air. The smell of burned circuitry drifted through the corridor. The lock disengaged instantly. The door slid open a few centimeters. Lena pushed it wider with her shoulder and stepped into the hallway. Dim red emergency lighting filled the corridor. The breath preferred darker environments. Their compound eyes could see perfectly in low light. Unfortunately for them, Lena's eyes had already adapted to darkness during her days inside the cell. She moved without making a sound. 2 decks down. Maintenance ladders connected the levels through narrow vertical shafts hidden between wall panels. Within minutes she reached the armory door. Just as she predicted. 1 breath guard sat outside on a metal stool. Half asleep. Its shock lance rested across its upper arms while its lower arms hung loosely by its sides. It never heard Lena approach. Her hand moved quickly to the base of its skull, pressing precisely against a small nerve cluster hidden beneath the exoskeleton plates. The pressure point shut down the nervous system instantly. The massive alien body went rigid, then limp. It collapsed silently to the floor. The guard would wake in 2 hours with a severe headache and no memory of what happened. Lena dragged the unconscious body into the armory and stepped inside. Weapons lined the walls. Shock lances, restraint devices, breath combat blades, and several racks of plasma pistols. She picked up 2 pistols and checked their charge levels. Full. Good. She secured them at her waist. Then she selected a curved breath combat blade and strapped it along her forearm. When she stepped back into the corridor a moment later, the door sealed behind her. The armory guard remained hidden inside. For the first time since the raid began, Lena Vasic was armed. But she was not heading toward escape. She was heading somewhere else. Back toward the holding cells. Because she had made a promise. And Lena Vasic did not break promises. The corridor outside the holding cells was silent. Lena moved through it like a shadow. The dim red emergency lights painted the metal walls in long dark stripes. Somewhere deeper inside the ship, machinery hummed steadily, completely unaware that the balance of power aboard the carrier had already begun to change. She stopped beside the main holding chamber. Inside that room were 50 frightened civilians. Farmers, technicians, families, and one 16-year-old girl who believed Lena would return. Lena opened a small junction panel beside the door. A cluster of cables and control circuits sat inside the metal housing. Breath engineering again. Efficient. Predictable. Within seconds she found the manual override node and cut the locking circuit. The heavy door slid open slowly with a quiet mechanical hiss. Inside the chamber, 50 pairs of eyes turned toward the entrance. For a moment no one spoke. They simply stared. Lena stood in the doorway holding 2 plasma pistols. The collar that once circled her neck was gone. The dim corridor lights behind her made her look like a dark silhouette against the red glow. Kalia was the first person to stand. The former Marine studied her carefully. Then he looked at the weapons in her hands. Then back at her face. How? He asked quietly. Lena stepped inside the room. We do not have time to explain, she said calmly. Right now I need everyone with military, police, or security experience to step forward. The prisoners exchanged confused looks. Slowly, 7 people moved. Kalia, Priya, a former colonial police officer named Des, and 4 others who had once worn uniforms in different parts of human space. Lena already knew their names. She had memorized them during the past days. She handed 1 plasma pistol to Kalia. The old soldier examined the weapon like a man greeting an old friend. Where did you get these? He asked. Armory, Lena replied simply. Kalia raised an eyebrow. You walked into a breath armory? Yes. The room became very quiet. Lena continued speaking, her voice steady and clear. This ship carries approximately 800 breath crew members. We cannot defeat them in open combat. Several prisoners looked terrified. But Lena finished the sentence calmly. Fortunately, we do not need to. She stepped closer to the group. I have mapped the ship's internal layout, guard rotations, and system controls. If we move quickly and quietly, we can isolate sections of the vessel and control them one by one. Kalia stared at her. You mapped the ship? Yes. How long have you been doing that? Since the shuttle left the planet. No one spoke for a moment. The calm confidence in her voice was unsettling. Finally Kalia nodded slowly. All right, he said. Suppose I believe you. What do you need from us? Lena pointed toward the corridor. We divide into teams. She looked directly at Kalia and Priya. You 2 will help me arm the others. Then she gestured toward the rest of the prisoners. Everyone else stays here. Lock this door from the inside. Do not open it for anyone except us. At that moment Mara pushed through the crowd. The girl ran straight toward Lena. You came back, she said breathless. I said I would. Mara looked at the weapons. Then back at Lena. What's happening? Lena crouched slightly so they were at the same eye level. We are going to take this ship. The girl blinked. You mean, fight them? Not exactly. Lena's voice remained calm. We are going to make the ship stop working. Within minutes the small resistance group moved into the corridor. Lena led them through a maintenance passage she had already identified from the vibration patterns inside the walls. The breath believed their ship was secure. But like most military vessels, it depended on hundreds of small systems working together perfectly. Communications, sensors, power relays, Navigation controls. Remove enough of those pieces, and the entire machine stopped functioning. Their first target was the internal communications hub on Deck 7. 2 guards stood outside the room. Kalia prepared to rush them. Lena stopped him with a raised hand. Too loud. Before anyone could react, she moved forward. Fast. One precise strike to the first guard's knee joint collapsed the exoskeleton structure instantly. The second guard raised its weapon. Lena's elbow struck the nerve cluster beneath its upper arm. Both aliens fell to the floor within seconds. The entire fight lasted less than 3 seconds. Kalia stared. I thought you were a dirt scientist. Lena opened the communication panel and began cutting wires. Today I am many things. The communication system died instantly. Across the ship, breath soldiers suddenly found their communicators silent. Their next target was the sensor control node. Without internal sensors, the crew could not track movement through the corridors. Des and Priya disabled the unit while Lena monitored the hallway. Minutes later the entire deck went blind. One by one the systems of the massive carrier began shutting down. Lights flickered. Communicators failed. Security doors refused to open. Inside the isolated sections of the ship, breath soldiers began shouting in confusion. Meanwhile Lena's team moved deeper through the vessel. By the time they reached the secondary weapons locker on Deck 5, their resistance group had grown larger. More prisoners had been freed from nearby holding cells. Some were injured. Some were terrified. But many were ready to fight. Lena armed them quickly with captured plasma pistols and shock lances. Kalia looked at the growing group of civilians holding alien weapons. You really think this will work? He asked quietly. Lena checked the charge level on her pistol. Yes. You sound very sure. She looked down the corridor toward the upper decks. Because the most dangerous part is already done. What was that? Lena answered simply. Getting started. Above them, on Deck 9, Sub-Commander Tyreek was beginning to realize something was very wrong. His communicator had stopped working. Security sensors were offline. And reports from his soldiers were turning into confused shouting. He stood in the corridor outside the officer quarters, staring at the dead device on his wrist. Then a thought entered his mind. The human woman in the isolation cell. The one who had not been afraid. Tyreek felt something cold crawl through his chest. Check the observation cell, he ordered a nearby guard. Minutes later the guard returned. The cell is empty. Tyreek's compound eyes widened slightly. For the first time since the raid began. The breath officer felt something unfamiliar. Fear. Because somewhere inside his warship, the negligible human was no longer a prisoner. She was hunting. By the time the 3rd hour of the breath night cycle began, the carrier was already falling apart. Not physically, but system by system, the ship was dying. Lights across multiple decks suddenly shut off. Emergency lamps flickered on, painting the corridors in dark red shadows. Communication lines had gone silent. Security sensors showed nothing but static. Inside different sections of the carrier, breath soldiers shouted in confusion. They could not reach their commanders. Engineers could not access control rooms. Armory doors refused to open. The massive warship had become a maze of sealed compartments. Exactly as Lena planned. Deep inside the vessel, freed prisoners were moving quietly under Kalia's command. Small groups secured corridors, guarded entrances and prevented breath soldiers from regrouping. The aliens still outnumbered them. But numbers meant nothing when an army could not communicate. Meanwhile, Lena moved alone toward the upper decks. Toward the bridge. She climbed a maintenance ladder and emerged into a narrow ventilation shaft above the command level. Through the metal grating below, she could see the main corridor leading to the bridge entrance. 6 guards stood there. The Overmind's personal security detail. The best warriors on the ship. Each one carried a plasma weapon. Each one stood nearly twice her size. Lena watched them quietly for several seconds. Then she dropped from the vent. The guards reacted instantly, raising their weapons. What followed lasted less than 10 seconds. Lena moved like a sudden storm. She did not fight them with brute strength. She fought with knowledge. Her first strike landed behind the knee joint of the nearest guard, collapsing its leg instantly. As the creature fell, she twisted sideways and drove the combat blade into a gap between 2 exoskeleton plates. The second guard fired. The plasma bolt struck empty air where Lena had been half a second earlier. She was already moving. Her elbow crushed a nerve cluster beneath the creature's upper arm. The alien's weapon clattered to the floor as its limb went numb. 3, 4, 5. The corridor filled with the heavy bodies of fallen breath soldiers. The final guard charged her with a roar, swinging both upper arms like massive hammers. Lena stepped inside the attack. One precise strike to the neck joint shut down the creature's nervous system instantly. Silence returned to the corridor. 6 breath warriors lay on the ground. Some unconscious. Some unable to move. Lena stood among them, breathing slowly. A thin line of blue breath blood ran across her forearm where a claw had barely grazed her. Behind her, footsteps approached quickly. Kalia arrived with 2 armed prisoners and froze at the sight. 6 alien soldiers on the ground. And Lena standing calmly in the middle of them. The old Marine shook his head slowly. I'm not even going to ask. Lena walked toward the bridge door. Good choice. She kicked the door open. Inside the command center, chaos exploded. Breath officers scrambled for weapons. Control panels flashed with warning lights. At the center of the room stood the ship's commander, Overmind Sethel. He was enormous even for a breath. His exoskeleton was scarred from years of combat, and his upper arms held a heavy plasma cannon. The moment he saw Lena, he fired. The blast slammed into the wall behind her. But she was already moving. Fast. Closing the distance. Sethel swung the cannon again. Another blast scorched the floor beside her. Then she reached him. The Overmind tried to strike her with his lower arms. Lena stepped inside the swing and twisted his weapon away. Her knee slammed into the joint of his front limb. Bone cracked. The massive alien staggered. 11 seconds later it was over. Sethel collapsed to the floor, stunned and unable to move. The remaining bridge crew froze. 7 breath officers stared at the small human standing over their fallen commander. Then one by one, they lowered their weapons. Kalia stepped into the bridge slowly, looking around the control room in disbelief. You just captured the flagship, he muttered. Lena walked to the main console. Not yet. She activated the external communication system. Across space, the signal broadcast to every breath ship in the raiding fleet. Her voice traveled through the void. Clear. Come. This is Dr. Lena Vasic of the Terran Union. The bridge crew stared at her in shock. I have taken control of your flagship. Your Overmind is alive and currently under my authority. She paused for a moment. In exchange for his safe return, you will release every human captive aboard your fleet. Silence filled the channel. You have 1 solar cycle to comply. Another pause. I will not ask twice. For nearly a full minute, nothing happened. Then the first signal appeared on the console. A surrender code. Another followed. Then another. One by one, the breath ships transmitted compliance signals. 6 ships. 6 surrenders. The entire raiding fleet had just yielded to 1 human. Kalia leaned against the wall and let out a long breath. I cannot believe that worked. Lena looked out through the large viewport at the distant stars. It worked, she said quietly, because they finally understood something. What? She glanced back at him. That humans are not as harmless as they look. 18 hours later, Terran Union warships arrived. 3 heavy cruisers and a carrier dropped out of faster-than-light travel near the captured breath fleet. Marines secured the vessel. Medical teams evacuated the rescued colonists. Rear Admiral Chen personally boarded the flagship. He found Lena standing near the main viewport on the bridge, watching the stars in silence. He saluted her formally. Dr. Vasic. She did not return the salute. 217 colonists were taken from Averest 7, she said calmly. 209 survived. Chen nodded slowly. We will make sure their names are recorded. Lena studied him for a moment. Names, she repeated. Not numbers. Agreed. Satisfied, she turned and walked past him. Her work here was finished. Days later, across dozens of alien worlds, rumors spread quickly. A breath war fleet had been captured. Not by a human armada. Not by a planetary defense system. By 1 woman. A quiet scientist. A woman who studied microbes in the dirt. And far away, inside the private cabin of a Terran cruiser, Lena Vasic sat alone on the edge of a narrow bed. A small photograph rested in her hands. Her research station on Averest 7. The small garden outside the door. Golden fields beneath twin suns. Her quiet life. She closed the image and set the device aside. Soon she would receive a new identity. A new assignment. Another quiet colony on another forgotten world. Another ordinary life. And she would wait again. Because somewhere out in the galaxy, someone would make the same mistake. They would see a harmless human. A farmer. A teacher. A scientist studying dirt. And they would never realize the truth. That sometimes, the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy Looks completely ordinary.